What's going on? This is Theo Gremminger from Player Profiler, and we're talking about defensive streaming options for you to use in week 3. We've been doing these videos now for multiple weeks. Week 1, we absolutely crushed it. I think it was about 3 or 4 of my recommendations all finished as top 8 defensive scorers. Last week was a little bit of a mixed bag. We're going to look to do a lot better than we did last week. Last week was not all bad. We recommended the Houston Texans defense. They finished number 1 in terms of scoring, depending on your scoring format, 1 or 2. They really teed up on Caleb Williams. That was a defensive win for us. We also recommended in that same game, even though the matchup was difficult, that we were going to use the Chicago Bears defense. That was one where the Bears were able to get to CJ Stroud 3 times. They also recovered a fumble, and they only gave up 19 points. A couple of negative ones, though. I was very into the Jacksonville Jaguars defense as a streamer. They had 2 sacks, gave up 16 points, but really not enough to move the needle for us. Seattle was pretty much middle of the road defensively. We're going to talk about Seattle again this week. We're going to go back to the well, but last week really didn't crush it like we wanted to see. And really the poor recommendation was the Colts defense. Colts defense was a nothing. That was a game where the Colts offense was effectively shut down by the Green Bay Packers. And the Colts defense gave us like nothing in terms of the interceptions, fumble recoveries, sacks. This was pretty much a nothing game where you got pretty much nothing out of them. So last week, Houston and Chicago really showed us that these are special defenses. We knew it in week 1. We talked about it in week 1 with Chicago. Chicago's one where we continually want to try to use them as much as possible. Every defense that I'm going to talk about as a streamer is going to be available in at least 40% of Yahoo leagues. When I do my waiver wire articles, I go a lot deeper. But when it comes to defense, most people are not rostering 2 defenses. So this creates an environment where you can find an edge by using the waiver wire, using free agents to find defensive matchups that can help you win your fantasy week. Plain and simple. It takes a little bit of extra effort, but streaming defenses year in, year out is a viable strategy to win in fantasy football. And we can sometimes find these edges that can give us an extra 5, 6, 7 points by using an effective defense. So this defensive video is not for you if you have the New York Jets defense. That's a set it and forget it defense. They shut down the Titans last week, and they are going to shut down the Patriots this week at home in New York. The Browns defense, this is a really strong one. Another defense where they have a great matchup against Daniel Jones and the Giants. Very limited offense besides Malik Neighbors. Browns defense is looking very strong. Steelers defense, great matchup this week against the Chargers. Chargers going west to east. Pittsburgh Steelers home opener. That defense is strong. 49ers defense is going to tee up against the Rams. 49ers coming off of a loss against another NFC West opponent in a game where they're really going to look to affect this decimated Los Angeles offensive attack and offensive line. And then the Buffalo Bills defense getting to the quarterback continually, really took Miami to the woodshed last week. They get a long week to prepare for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Buffalo's a very strong option. So if you have one of those teams rostered, you can start them. A couple of the teams that I'm going to talk about tonight might be options to start instead of a team like Buffalo, but those 5 are pretty much set in. So my defensive streamers for this week, I'm going to give you 7 this week. We're going to go a little bit deeper. We're going to try to help you out, and I'm sort of going to rank these teams by how you should value them. Let's start out. We're going to make a note that the Houston Texans defense really should be rostered in a lot of places. And this is probably going to be the last week I'm going to be able to talk about the Houston Texans defense. I don't have them as number 1, but I want to make a note that this is probably going to be the last week that we can talk about them. And this is a defense that now has 9 sacks on the year, 3 interceptions, completely annihilated Caleb Williams. There is a lot of quality on this Houston Texans defense. So shout out to them. They're going to be rostered in more than 60% of leagues next week. But my number 1 defensive streaming option, this is a team that's going to be available to you in 62% of Yahoo leagues. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And the main reason we want to use them this week, it's Bo Nix. Bo Nix is struggling mightily. Denver's coming off of a loss at home to the Pittsburgh Steelers, where Denver's defense played very, very well, and the Steelers completely controlled the game because Bo Nix and the Broncos cannot do anything on offense. Tampa Bay is going to tee up on this Denver Broncos offense. The defense for Tampa Bay is going to have a very strong week, and you also have Denver can't come in there and take the air out of the football because Baker Mayfield and this Buccaneers offense is moving the ball very, very well. They are 2-0, beat the hell out of the Carolina Panthers, and then won that really big win over Detroit last week. So I'm looking at Tampa Bay, available in a lot of leagues. This is a team that I think you can comfortably stream. Chicago, we'll go back to them. On the road in Indianapolis. Indianapolis coming off of the loss to the Packers. Indy gets back Josh Downs this week, which is going to help them a lot, I think. I think Josh Downs is an underrated player and a player that makes their offense a little bit more balanced, gives them another threat, and a player who can win underneath, a player can win in the slot. It's sort of like how it's drawn up. But we've got to say that this Chicago defense is one of the best in football. We saw them against Houston last week. Houston only scored 19 points. Chicago put their team in a position to win. The week before, Chicago was the reason that Chicago Bears defense were the reason they got the win over Tennessee. Chicago Bears defense is awesome. They have 6 sacks on the year. They have 2 fumble recoveries. They have 2 interceptions, 2 touchdowns. Really, really talented defense. We want to roster them. I talked about Houston. Houston, just a pure like set it and forget it type team. Sneaky matchup on the road in Minnesota this week. But this is one that we want to kind of roster. Another streamer that we love. We talked about them as a defensive stash. Stick around to the end of this video. I'm going to give you stashes for week 4. But Vegas, we would have liked this matchup better if it was Bryce Young on the road in Vegas. But Andy Dalton, I think, will be more effective, but it's still a team that's really, really struggling. Andy Dalton is still a quarterback that you can get after. I mean, we're actually talking about Andy Dalton as a huge improvement. That's just how bad Bryce Young was. But Vegas defense is a viable team to use. They are available in 68% of leagues. And then the Green Bay Packers defense. This is one where they're available in 75% of Yahoo leagues. They played very, very well last week against Anthony Richardson and the Colts. And now this week, they get to go up against a quarterback that's really, really struggling in Will Levis. We saw what that Chicago defense was able to do in week 1 against Will Levis. We could see something similar like that this week. So Green Bay is a really, really strong streaming option. We talked about Tampa Bay at the top. We talked about the 2 teams that are sort of bet on, set it and forget it. And you can forget watching my video potentially if these teams play really well, because Houston and Chicago are getting near the percentage where we're just not going to be able to talk to them about them as streamers. And I think they're about one more strong performance away from that. One defense that is completely underrated and could be a set it and forget it option, Minnesota. Minnesota has a difficult matchup this week. They're going up against CJ Stroud. The game is in Minnesota, but Minnesota's defense has 11 sacks on the season and 3 interceptions. And Brian Flores has done such an exceptional job since he's got there that he might be in the mix to become a head coach again in this league sooner than later. And then the last defensive streaming option this week is the Seattle Seahawks. I've recommended them for 2 straight weeks, and we haven't gotten that smash performance from them. But Skylar Thompson, now on the road in Seattle, in a difficult environment to play in. Seattle played Denver in week 1. They had a chance to really tee up, let Denver hang around in that game. Can they put a complete game together? We saw the Seattle offense last week take a big step forward, and I think that Seattle offense is starting to get better week in, week out under Ryan Grubb, which is going to present favorable situations for this defense to get to the quarterback. Skylar Thompson on the road in Seattle, very difficult game for him. We're looking to fade bad and inexperienced quarterbacks as often as possible when we get into this situation. Now, every week, I'm going to give you a couple of defenses that you can stash for the following week. And this week, the two defenses that you want to stash are probably the two defenses that are going to be rostered in the most leagues that I can talk about here. And that's Houston and Chicago. And Houston and Chicago, if you use them this week, then you're going to have an opportunity to just leave them in your lineup and skip watching this next week, because the Chicago Bears have the Rams coming into Chicago. Rams are decimated on offense, and they have offensive line concerns, and they're going up against a buzzsaw in the Chicago Bears next week in Chicago. So that's one where if you use Chicago this week in a difficult matchup against Indianapolis, then you get them in the easy matchup next week. If you can afford to roster two defenses, go ahead, because I think that's going to be a real edge for you. And then the Houston Texans defense, we talked about how appealing they are. They are going to host the Jacksonville Jaguars next week. So those are both very, very appealing stats. And then one more defense to kind of consider stashing is another one you can use this week. Vegas plays this week against Carolina, and then next week they get the Cleveland Browns, which could be, if they have a strong performance against Carolina, we might consider just leaving them in your lineup. So this week's streaming options: Tampa Bay, Chicago, Houston, Minnesota, Las Vegas, the Green Bay Packers, the Seattle Seahawks. Tampa Bay, probably my favorite defensive streamer of the week, and also widely available in multiple leagues. And then our stashes for next week are also on the same list. Houston, Chicago, and Las Vegas all have plus matchups. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you want more videos like this, make sure you're subscribing to Player Profiler. Check out all of my podcasts and shows right here at Player Profiler YouTube, and subscribe to Player Profiler podcasts anywhere you get your podcasts. I'm Theo Gremminger, and we're going to help you win this season. Stick with us here, and we got you covered.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.